Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Winitha Bonney and I'm glad to speak and share this space with you for the next couple of minutes. I am from Melbourne, Australia, and here what we do is we have a lot of pride around our Indigenous people. And so what I wanted to do is to start off by doing an acknowledgement to country. And this really extends out to any First Nations colleagues from other countries around the world and others that may also be standing on stolen land. So I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which I and you stand on today, the land of which we have the privilege to live, work, and play on every day. And I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future, as well as pay my respects to First Nations colleagues with us. This land, Australian land, will always be and always was Aboriginal land, sovereignty never ceded. For those that don't know me, perhaps the majority, a little bit about me. My name is, as I mentioned before, Winitha Bonney, and I'm a thought leader in the advancement of people of colour and in building anti-fragile cultures of allyship. And there really are three facets to the work that I do. So I work with people of power to empower, educate, and equip them to overcome internal and external barriers to thrive in white structures and become the leader that they always knew that they were deep down. And this is really about creating equity fulfillment for them, their families, and their communities. But I also work with organizations in two other spaces as well. So I work with businesses and leaders to get clear and get focused on building an anti-fragile culture of allyship, which is what we'll talk about a little bit today. And I help what I call the brave, bold, and courageous few to build racial equity in their organizations and communities. And the way that I do this is by training, but also through the roles of being an advisor as well. So my work is based in research and science, and as part of my work, I've had over 150 conversations with people of colour from all around the world in terms of what they are experiencing in the corporate organisation. And this informs my training programs and my workshops and my advice that I give to individuals as well. I've been the only person of colour the majority of my life. I grew up in a very white community here in Australia, was the only person of colour in preschool, in junior and middle years, all the way up into university as well. But I've also had the opportunity and the pleasure to work in the States and in Canada. And through my practice, I work with individuals across the world. So it's really great to have that international experience. But the one thing that we united through is through our collective experience being people of colour. I've been really obsessed with business since I was about 15 years of age, and all the books on my bookshelf are, fiction is really that much, but the majority of the books are like, business and personal development. And business has been a real passion place for me. So when you combine human transformation work with business and inclusion, there can be a degree of complexity to the work, which, Thomas was sharing with earlier before. And so I feel like my superpower is to make it really simple, but really clear and practical for everyone. So before we kick off, what we need to do is to prep ourselves for this session and the work of being an ally. And what I want to invite you to do is, if you have a good old-fashioned piece of paper or using your iPad or whatever object is in front of you right now, is to draw 3 columns across a rectangle. And these are what we call your ally journal, and they consist of 3 columns. And the header that goes across the first column is called notes. So it's pretty obvious, but it's called notes. And this is anything that you see or hear that is of relevance to you. The second column is what you think, what you hear, and what you experience. So anything that I say or that you read in the session or in your journey as an ally, what are you thinking, what are you feeling, and what are you experiencing? Like, we operate from here so much, and as Thomas shared in the earlier session, we also need to operate from our heart space and need to really tap into that space here, because that is where the gold is for us as allies. That is where we are going to find all those nuggets that we need to kind of work through or remove to really be an effective ally for Black, Indigenous, and people of colour. The last column is my favorite column, and that is titled Action. So again, I think there's a lot of similarities between mine and Thomas's presentation, but one of the things that he mentioned, which is what I also strongly encourage, is there's not going to be any change if there's not going to be any action. So based on what you saw and what you heard, the first column, notes, based on what you felt, what you were thinking, what you're experiencing, the second column, what action do you or your organization need to take in order to become an effective and true ally for people of color? So that's all I want you to do. Is I want you to think, I want you to experience, and I want you to commit. So what today will look like, or the session will look like, is pretty rapid. We'll talk about how equality is being tackled currently in the workplace. We're going to zoom out and look at this from the context of an organization or a business. I'm going to be talking about anti-fragility and how that links into culture in the workplace. And we'll talk a little bit about racial equality. And that's what this presentation is about. It's about this conversation of building anti-fragile cultures of allyship, but in the context of racial equality. And then I'll outline some simple steps that you can take to do this work as well. So what this work really is asking us, what equality work is really asking us of individuals is to do more of that, is to do more of inclusion. And what that is we need to actually do the work of inclusion, all aspects of what that work actually asks of us as individuals and organizations. And we need to pay attention to the things that we not be paying attention to. And these are inherently the people that are falling through the cracks. And right now, Black, First Nations, Brown, and people of color are falling through the cracks. So what's being done about it? Well, the problem that we have currently in organizations, as Thomas talked about, was a lot of organizations are engaging in anti-bias or anti-racism training. And as he said from research, this can not just be, ineffective, but can also be actually harmful as well. And this really is what I call a Band-Aid solution. It's a bit of a knee-jerk response, right, to racial equity and anti-racism work. And this is because this work really looks at our thoughts, how we think, whether they be unconscious and implicit, etc. And it's really unrealistic to think that, over a few hours of training, that simply by changing our thought patterns and creating awareness, that it's somehow going to lead to different behaviors. And this approach is built on the belief that thoughts drive feelings, which then lead to behaviors. So I have had quite a background in corporate innovation, in particular lean startup, agile, and design thinking. They're my real passion places in terms of business. And when consulting, I'd always tell people that inherently what we're doing is not just teaching people a new way of working, but what we're actually asking them to do is to change their beliefs and their behaviors, and that this is a monumental feat for the average human being. Telling them how great innovation was and preaching about how the world and the business was going to change as a result of working in this new way was actually quite futile. But by engaging them in the process through a design sprint or a scrum meeting and approaching it from a behaviors first perspective, we gave them the opportunity to experience what it was like, to therefore remove the stigma and assumptions from it. And they therefore found the process really fun, engaging, which led to them engaging this new behavior and these new mindsets. So what research shows us is that we can't just think our way to new behaviors, but yet we persist as it's the easy way out, right? So watching a video on how to call out racism is much more comfortable than actually doing it in the workplace. Reading content on how to have a conversation with a person of color is easier than actually having one. Reading a book on white privilege is easier than having a tough conversation with your CEO and asking them to commit resources, money to do the work that they need to be doing to support Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's kind of like a resistance, right? An excuse to not do the thing that's actually going to be the most impactful and the most meaningful in the long term, because here's the truth. The stuff that is actually going to create change and is actually the same stuff, the actions that are actually uncomfortable and difficult. It seems to me kind of to be like the natural laws of life, right? That to create true progress, to have growth or experience change, we need to lean into the attention. but yet it's uncomfortable and it's hard. It doesn't feel so cozy and comfortable. So we take the easy route of least resistance and unconscious bias or anti-race training, or any training that's really a couple of hours to maybe 1 to 3 days long. So what I want to do is to share the next slide. And in this slide, you can see that this is a clunky approach that we are currently having in the workplace today, and the approach that we're currently having in creating racial equality in the workplace. We start off on setting the outcome on creating an anti-racist culture. The focus is on stopping race discrimination in the workplace. And because we've set the goal on stopping race discrimination, we engage then in unconscious bias training and 1 to 3 day training programs, hoping to create awareness, to change employee thoughts, which would then lead to changing their feelings, which would then hopefully change the behaviors and create an anti-racist culture. And research shows that we've been getting it wrong this entire time, right? Like, we've been trying to change behaviors upside down. It's not about changing our thoughts. To create change and transformation, we need to start first with behavior, with action. And when we do, our behaviors provoke feelings, which then impact our thoughts and our beliefs. So yes, like Thomas said in the earlier session, anti-racism starts with awareness first, and it's important work. But it's not the solution, and it's not the answer. Stopping racist remarks and behaviors do not automatically lead to equity and inclusion for people of color. The focus of this ineffective approach is skewed towards what we want people to stop doing, as opposed to what we need people to start doing. And what we need for our people to do is to engage in the behaviors and actions of being an effective and active ally. Because it's the behaviors and actions that are actually going to create change, not awareness and thoughts alone. And so the reason why our efforts are not working is because we've set our sights on the wrong goal. Anti-racism or race discrimination is not the goal. It's a byproduct of the mission. Equity and equality for Black, Indigenous people of color is the mission. And building a culture of allyship is the goal, and how we achieve this. Because it's those that have privilege that have the ability to remove obstacles, open the doors of opportunity, to advocate and create change, to push the buttons that we need to be pushed in order to create equity. Because true equity and equality for people of color is not solely achieved by people just engaging or not engaging in racist behaviors and remarks. But equity and equality for people of color is achieved by allies, true active allies who are proactively and consistently taking action, and what we call being an accomplice or being an activist, being on the front line. And so here's the truth. True allies are anti-racist. It's part of the journey. So can you feel the energy shift there, right? Anti-racism, race discrimination, and moving towards allyship and building anti-fragile cultures of allyship around supporting Black, Indigenous people of color. People of color need you to be allies, because the truth is it's not enough to be anti-racist. So the focus on building a culture of allyship in your families, in your communities, in your teams, in your organizations needs to be around creating justice and freedom and equality for people of color. So moving into the next slide, we can see it really is behaviors, repeated behaviors that create change, right? So for example, you might be scared about doing this, speaking publicly, but after engaging in the act of speaking in front of an audience, you feel proud, you feel a sense of achievement, you think, oh my geez, that wasn't that bad, which then leads to more behaviors of you speaking at public events and meetings. To change your thinking, we need to start with behaviors first. Now, the only thing to note here when we're talking about this in the context of racial equity is we need to be very conscious about the actions that we take as allies. We in the early stages of our journey, we can't just go and implement and take action on any place, because we are at risk of traumatizing or re-traumatizing people of color. What we need is guidance, we need training, we need direction, we need to be mentored and coached in how to be an ally for people of color. And this needs to come from a person who has lived experience, but is also an expert in this field, someone that has D&I expertise. And that expert would set the parameters around the behaviors and actions that you take as an ally, that your organization takes, and gives you the tools to interrupt biases, but importantly, to give you what I call the holy trinity of allyship, and that is support, because this work is difficult and uncomfortable and difficult. And in order to have grit and perseverance in this journey, we need to be supported as allies. But also accountability and structure, which is really important in our having a behaviors first approach. And so, as they say, what this really is about is that that sentence that people use, which is actions speak louder than words, and this cannot be any more applicable for people of color. So how do we approach this in the workplace? Well, to create a culture of allyship, we need to approach it from a behaviors first approach, because it's behaviors and actions that create culture, not thoughts alone. And how we approach this in terms of creating a culture of allyship is by doing work specifically in two areas. So we need to create spaces where people in the organization can come together, a safe space for white allies to come together and to do the work that they need to do in the workplace. And we also need to create safe spaces for people of color to do the work that they need to do in the workplace. Because what we're seeing a lot in organizations is work being solely around unconscious bias and anti-racism training. And this is benefiting the people that already have privilege, right? The energy, the focus, the resources, the financial resources, the time is all going towards people that already experience privilege. And yes, they are the same people that need to be pushing those buttons and making change happen in the organization. But once again, we're experiencing and seeing, Black, Indigenous people of color being left to flounder and to just survive on their own and not having the tools to even survive, let alone thrive in the workplace. And so what we need to be doing is supporting allies in their journey and how to take actions that are going to be culturally and psychologically safe for Black and Indigenous people of color, but also providing safe spaces where people of color can come together and do the work that they need to do individually as well. Because I always say to people that, we can't just go ahead and, if we think it and believe it, it will go and happen, in terms of our own leadership journey. The first step in leadership, in being a person of color, is actually in healing. And in terms of attention and energy and resources in the workplace, we can't just be doing work in terms of anti-discrimination or anti-racism or race discrimination or unconscious bias, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be providing support for people to become allies, but we need to also be providing resources and money, ensuring that there's equity for people of color to get the support that they need to thrive in white structures and to experience healing in the workplace. It's a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So you will have people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous, people that have addiction issues, that are in a specific program that do the work that they need to do. But you will have people that have been affected, people that are friends and family that are part of a separate program called Al-Anon, and they will do the work that they need to do. And a lot of that work is around their own healing and how given tools on how to cope, how to manage whilst their family member or their friend is on the path to recovery. And that's what is needed here in organizations. This is actually how we build unity, how we build a culture of allyship. People of color need the tools. They need to learn the language of white structures and systems and how to thrive. And allies need to learn the language and need the tools in order to support people of color in a way that's psychologically and culturally safe as well. It's kind of like having relationship issues too. So if you are in a romantic relationship or even in a friendship and you are experiencing, dysfunction in a relationship, you will go and seek the support of a therapist. You're not necessarily always going to see your friends, right? And that therapist may ask you to see them separately so that you can do the work that you need to do. So as counterintuitive as this seems, in some D&I circles, they call this affinity groups, but this is the work that we need to be doing. We can't just be doing work around people that experience privilege already in the workplace. We need to be supporting people of color as well. So In terms of this work, this is really coming from the context also that if we do work only in one place, it's an imbalance of power and equity in itself. And so what we need to be doing is asking both individuals to go deep in the work, to be vulnerable, to be uncomfortable, and to do the work that they each need to do to understand the language of each other. They need to lean into the intention, into the uncomfortability of the individual journeys that they both need to go on to. And so the meta outcome from this work is anti-fragility, right? There is no better work to do to build anti-fragile people, cultures, and organizations than racial equity work. It is the work that tends to have the most fear. There are a lot of organizations and leaders that are fearful about even naming the work for what it is. They use terms like cultural diversity and multiculturalism to kind of do that work, but not, be so forthright in it. And this is them really missing out on a massive opportunity, because anti-fragility is something that gets stronger as a result of tension. So if you pump weights or, do weights repeatedly, what we need to happen is we need to break down the muscle in order for the muscle to actually get stronger. And so some of the language that's being used is to dismantle and decolonize systemic oppression and things like that. And that can seem really overwhelming for individuals. But the opportunity in doing this work and leaning into this work is that, by looking at our systems and questioning them and asking, are they really inclusive, is we give ourselves the opportunity to build an anti-fragile culture and organization and people as well. And this is taken from the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And we know from his work that, fragile systems like a teacup breaks as a result of stress or tension, whereas resilience gets stronger as, pushes against stress or tension, but anti-fragility gets stronger as a result of stress or tension. So to build anti-fragile organizations and anti-fragile cultures of allyship, we need to ask allies and people of color to do the vulnerable work and to go deep in the work. This is the most profound work you will ever do in your organization, because it's the organizations and brands that lean into the tough spaces that are the ones that survive and often are the strongest brands. We talk about this technological disruption all the time, but what we need to do is to embrace social disruption. And, we talk about organizational change and transformation and innovation. Well, social disruption is the new innovation in the workplace. And by leaning into this work, you are able to build an anti-fragile culture of organization, of allyship in your business. So that's it from me today. If you need any help or support, you are more than welcome to contact me. I have clients that I work with all around in the world. This morning I was speaking to people. I had people that were based in Toronto. In the evening, I am having meetings with people that are based in Europe. Oceans apart, no barriers in this techno world. So if you are interested to know what organizations are doing here in Australia, or Australasia as we call it, and would need help or support in this area, please do get in contact with me. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Just put a little message that you saw me presented at PAFOW, and we can be connected that way too. Thank you very much for your time and your energy.
Winitha, thank you for your time and your energy and what you're doing. And I'd like to ask a question or two if you have some more time. You have some more time?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And Adele, tell Shane we're going to run just a little bit long on this, because this is an important opportunity to discuss something, because it's something that I'm struggling with, and as I'm having discussions with business leaders and friends and family, it's let's say you have that unity, that you have thought about your behaviors and feelings, and you've understood the indigenous experience, the Black experience here in the United States, the Native American experience, and you have a high level of empathy, and you understand the need for change. And now you go into your workplace, however, virtually or in person, and you see people either, to our earlier discussion with Thomas, either overtly racist and acting inappropriately, or complicit in their behaviors and allowing the norm to persist. And as someone who's walking the halls, so to speak, or hearing a conversation, even virtually, what's the intervention? What does one do? Do you go up and square up and say that's not okay? Do you elevate it to somebody who can take appropriate action? Is there, from an organizational perspective, is there uh, a call-in number, or I don't know the word I'm looking for, a Dropbox or something like that, that you share that story, so it starts to develop a database of data that shows that there's an issue? Because and before I let you respond, I'll just say this. Here it is, 2020, 50 years on from the civil rights movement. And it's roughly my age. And, I see this world happening, and I knew there were a lot of racist people in the United States. But I will say I'm saddened by how many there are, who are not only overtly racist, but who are complicit with the norm and are unwilling to do anything about it. So as I walk through my day to day and I see and I hear things, I could spend my whole day just intervening with people. So it takes a lot of energy. We have to choose our spots. And I'll be honest, I'm still struggling, and I know a lot of others are, is how do you choose your spots? And if so, what is the action? So it's probably very involved. It's, for our limited time here, but what comes to mind as I share that?
The Serenity Prayer, actually. So, which is, God grant me the wisdom to, control the things that I can, let go of the things that I can't control, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I think for, in race work, we have this term called emotional tax, or the emotional burden that people of color carry in calling out racism and being on the front foot all the time, and being dragged into diversity and inclusion committees just because they're the token, black or brown person in the organization. And I feel like it's a similar journey that allies go on as well. There is an emotional tax that they pay when they constantly are calling out racism. So I always encourage individuals to do a lot of self-care work and to make sure that their cup is constantly full, in being able to be an activist ally, in order to be a true and effective ally, and to keep doing that work, because we can't just, a true ally is someone that takes on the burden of Black, Indigenous people of color as their own, to reduce risk for them. So it's not about saving them, or I always say to people, it's not about saving them, it's about serving them. And it's about carrying the burden, about reducing risk for them. And the way that we can do that in the organization is by actively doing all the things that you said before, which is, calling it out respectfully. And I always say to people to do it with love and respect, but to understand that it's up to them to make the behavioral change, and to raise it at a higher level, if so be it, but to also use social media as a platform to educate people that around what you don't have to, obviously for privacy and confidentiality reasons, you don't have to name people and drag them down that journey. But one of the things I saw an ally did who came to one of my events is she used the words white supremacy. And Australia, I'll be honest, Australia is a lot further behind than America. I've worked in the States, so I know this firsthand. And for her to say that word in a public space, woof, everyone, ears lit up. And someone was like, oh, I don't appreciate that, blah, 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 blah. And she put that on social media and shared that experience with other people, because you just don't know where people are in that journey. So I think it's about taking consistent action, making sure your cup is full, but understanding that it's actually up to the individual to change if they want to. There is an amazing thought leader called Chloe Valdery. I think that's how you pronounce her name properly. She's in the States. She's based in the States as well. And she created this framework called a theory of engagement, and that really connected with me. And part of that theory, there is a range of principles, but it talks through that, we're human beings, and we must, give feedback to build people up, to not tear them down. And I think that's a really useful framework or a set of principles to use in your communication or your actions towards people that may be discriminative in the workplace. I also I invite allies know and invite them to actually have a zero tolerance policy, but to communicate that actively in their family, in their friendship groups, and their organizations. And that is really about boundary setting as well, and letting people know that my boundary is that I have a zero tolerance policy for any comment or behavior that is discriminatory in nature. And that if you were to engage in this behavior, these are the actions that I will need to take in response to that as well. So I think communication is really important. I think as we start to do this work as organizations, those individuals will start to lead the organization naturally. And that's why it's so important to build a culture of allyship, so that because what will happen is those individuals who don't want to consent to that work, that don't agree with it, that believe all lives matter, for example, they will naturally fall off. And that's their own journey that they need to go on, and so be it. But what we need to be doing is fostering, developing, growing, nurturing a culture of allyship and taking our people on that journey. So calling out racism is really important, but it's about what's a journey that we need to map out for our people? What do they need to start doing? And how can we get them doing that with a behaviors first approach, as opposed to just having people speak and present or having town halls and things like that?
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful approach, and it shows your compassion, understanding, and pursuit of a better world. So thank you for what you do. Really, really appreciate you. Thank you for staying on a bit longer. Look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Be well.
Amazing. You too. Bye.